I want to explore a theme that I've explored here many times before, and it is the theme of Grunty's body. Because Grunty's body is changing constantly throughout the games, right? She first is, let's say, a flesh and bones witch. Then she is a skeleton. Then, in chronological release order, she is a robot. And then, if we count nuts and bolts as part of the saga, then she's also some weird roboty thing. If I can remember correctly. So we have, okay, there's something going on with her body then, right? The saga is clearly presenting to us a person whose body is changing all the time. And not only that, but her body is a big part of the quest itself. Like, what's going on in the games, story-wise, has a lot to do with her body. Uh, this becomes apparent in the second game, and I think also in the robot game, but I'm not quite sure. I think in Tui, obviously, it's all about her reclaiming her body. She wants to be her real self again. She isn't her real self, right? According to her, right? She feels as if she isn't her real self. She's just a bunch of bones, and she needs an actual body. I think that in the robot game, it's more or less the same idea of trying to, trying to meddle with the situation so that she can stop being a robot or something. I don't know. I should have checked that before making the video, but I think it was something like that. And in any case, these readings of the game then make it, for me, inevitable to read that meaning in the first game, which is that in the first game, she is also trying to get her real body back. It's just that the first game is slightly more metaphorical in some way, and psychological, that she doesn't feel like she is the person that she should be. She should be a different kind of person, which mainly means a different body here. At least, the games are emphasizing this body aspect, bones, mechanism, robot, flesh, right? It's that part of herself that is being, searched. And in the first game, she does that by kidnapping Banjo's sister, whose name I'm not entirely sure of. Tutti? Something like that, right? We'll look it up. Tutti. She kidnaps her and sort of transfuses her body into hers through a strange machine, so that she can be the type of body that she thinks she should be, right? I think it's ambiguously worded in the manual and in the actual in-game dialogue why she's doing this exactly. I think it's because she's just jealous. It's a typical fairy tale thing, right? She's jealous that she isn't the most beautiful person in the land, right? Apparently, according to the magical mirror, the cauldron, Tutti is the most beautiful woman, I suppose, in this case, in the land, right? And so she's like, well, I should be the most beautiful. I should be number one. And so that implies, that implies getting a different body, and a body that, to be frank, right, if you look at the game over sequence, it's hard not to interpret that as it being a body that is based on the idealization of women's bodies by men, right? It like that. You get that sense that what Grunty ends up becoming in the game over sequence, and what she wants to become, right? And it's more complicated than that, but there is some of these themes are revolving around this game in some way, right? There is something about sexualization, right? She becomes the kind of body that you would find in magazines, pornography, entertainment that is aimed at sort of, drawing sexual attraction from heterosexual men. That would be one way of putting it, right? Something along these lines is happening in this game, as it happens in a bunch of other games and in a bunch of just general entertainment, right? This is something that happens and a theme that happens in entertainment. So that's one part of it. It seems to me it's that, but it's also becoming number one. There's this fairy tale idea of you're going to become number one. You can't be number 5 on the list. You need to be number 1. You need to find your opponents and sort of destroy them and become number 1. There's this aspect of competition in it that I find interesting for reasons that might become clearer in Banjo Tooie, but I still want to explore that a little more, because in Banjo Tooie, more overt kind of themes of market and capitalism appear, because Grunty in Banjo Tooie seems to be involved in several business ventures that mimic the stereotype of the big company, whatever, multinational company that wants to control all the land and has adverse effects on the land, right? Which is a typical kind of, I suppose in a sense it was already starting to be a typical narrative in the 90s, it seems to me, with things like Captain Planet, cartoons like that, and I don't know, I suppose most cartoons had some sort of episode or villain that echoed an environmentalist desire to attack these sorts of companies. Grunty somehow ends up embodying that, the idea of the business person who is threatening to the environment. Grunty Industries is polluting the waters. It seems as if the whole of the Isle of Hags is sort of filled with these little business ventures that suck the life from the earth and just pollute it. Or Grunty herself, with the, what's it called? The big kind of machine they use to suck life out of people. Bob, right? I think. With that gun, I think they literally, either her or the sisters mentioned something about it being a gun that sucks the life out of the earth, right? And you can see it replaces it with zombie death. It sucks life, replaces it with death, and then it keeps that life for itself, in order to, I suppose, inject Grunty with life so that she can become a flesh and bones body again, herself, who she should be. This already introduces the strange theme in this sequence of games, which is that Grunty is sort of in a weird kind of it's sort of like a snake biting its tail situation, right? Where the more she tries to acquire a body that is more real than the body she has now, a body that is less decaying, less imperfect, right, according to herself, than the one she has, the farther and farther away she seems to get from her own ideal, right? She first becomes a skeleton, then it's again not chronologically, but in the game order, she then becomes a robot, which has less of the like original bone material that her flesh and bones body would have, right? So she's becoming more and more distant from, let's say, who she seems to want to become, but precisely because she's trying so hard to be something else than what she is. So that's, you could say, and I'm not saying that is, necessarily good or bad. It just, that seems to be a reading in the game. A reading that could be made, I feel. And I say that it's not good or bad for, themes that I would like to explore later, and that again I'm pretty sure I've already explored, but I'm just never get sort of tired of this game. That Grunty, you can read it in this way of, poor Grunty, she wants to be someone who she isn't, and this somehow is a tragedy for her, and it just puts her more and more into situations that she shouldn't be in, or that she doesn't want to be in, like becoming a skeleton or a robot. And so it's easy to think, well, obviously she shouldn't have done that, right? She shouldn't have tried to become someone else than who she already was, right? She should have somehow just been, stayed where she was. But of course, first of all, the game itself also provides sort of symbolic reasons to think that is also not, let's say, a good reading, or a reading that takes all of the details into question. Because right, this because opens us into an entire different area, right? Which is the area I want to try and connect to now. It's the area of the disappeared women. There are characters in this game who are women who have disappeared in some way, or who are, again, just like locked up. This is like a strong archetype in this game. I can't help feeling that it is a strong archetype here. And so, I guess we could point to a few examples. There are the famous ones, the ones I've sort of mentioned before. There's Canary Mary is locked up in a cage, but also like underground. We have Mary Maggie is locked up inside a fish. She's been digested by a huge fish and is locked up there. Dilberta is locked up literally in prison. We then get into slightly more symbolic territory, you could say, because there is also Tutti, Banjo's sister, is lost in this game, right? Famously sort of inserted into a milk carton, not herself, but her image, her lost sort of ad is on a milk carton. So, it bridges the gap between these themes, because you could say, for example, that Mary Maggie is locked up, but she's also lost, right? People don't know where she is, where she's gone. She's lost. She's lost. She's deep underground, locked up. So being locked up underground is also somehow being equated to being lost, because other people can't find you. You're locked up, but you're locked up somewhere invisible, somewhere that's hidden away from the common world, from the outside world. So there is that level of being locked up. And then, for example, another symbolic way in which this appears in the game, I think, is Kazooie herself. Kazooie is also a woman, and she is locked up inside Banjo's backpack. That is where she spends all of her time. All of the game is inside a backpack, inside a dark, locked up place, right? That becomes much more like symbolic, because she doesn't sort of consider herself to be locked up at any point, I don't think. But I don't know, to me it sort of resonates in some way with the other themes. That there is just a lot of imprisonment, and a lot of the people imprisoned and lost are women. So that has a lot to say to the themes that we were talking about, I think. Because then, right, Grunty is in that same situation. Grunty is also in this situation. She is locked up. Right? She herself sort of says so. She is locked up in a body that is not herself, and that somehow is not who she wants to be. Right? She's not happy in this sort of a world. And it sort of also connects with the desire to be number one, to be on top of the world, to be someone who is ruling over the world, the typical sort of villain desire. Because in some way, it's so given all of this sort of stuff in the game, it's hard for me not to see that a sort of division is being made between men and women, right? There is something about this game that is clearly about gender in some way, that the division between the binary kind of gender roles, right? That the sort of the mainstream, view on gender, the traditional sort of roles, is somehow a part of this game, I would say. It seems hard to see this game without seeing that the protagonists themselves, Banjo Kazooie, have melded into one same creature almost. It's hard to see Banjo Kazooie as two separate people at some points. It's almost as if they are together, one entity. When Kazooie spreads her wings to fly, it almost seems as if Banjo has wings, because Banjo has wings coming out of his backpack, right? Or when Kazooie is whatever, like moving around in other different ways, then Banjo sort of gets packed into the backpack or something. Like, they seem to be one same entity in any case. And then the game is making these sorts of thematic divisions between men and women, it feels to me, where there are a lot of women who are locked up or lost. There are a lot of men who are in similar situations as well. like one of them that I can think of is there is a theme in Banjo Tooie of like how would I say, clumsy male partners, which is also like a cliche, right? The game is playing with cliches in some way. It's a cliche about gender roles, that you would have the sort of clumsy husband archetype, or the sort of, you know, the kind of lazy uh yeah, I don't know, just the sort of lazy husband. Like you have Bottles, obviously, right? It is sort of in this position. Bottles is Bottles is complicated because Bottles is somehow put in this position partly because he dies. He dies, so he's late for lunch or for dinner. So that makes it seem as if he's late, you know, he's clumsy and late. And the thing is that in some ways, he is, right? This is really complicated. At least I find it really complicated because Bottles is already being portrayed as someone who is slightly like relaxed and doesn't, you know, he doesn't seem like someone necessarily who wouldn't be late for dinner. But he obviously, like, he is also concerned about being late for dinner, expresses that concern, and can't fulfill his own promise because of his body, again, because he dies, because he just can't physically go. Anyway, so then he is put in the role of the sort of, I'm going to call this the clumsy husband because I don't know, it's just easier. The clumsy husband, and his wife is sort of, you know, frustrated with him. We have Boggy, the polar bear, I think, is also in a similar position where his wife has to pick up all the children and do again all of these tasks that are stereotypically applied and expected of the female archetype, right? And this again, I think, is where all the game is revolving around somehow, is that there are a bunch of tasks that are expected of the female gender role. Like Bottles' wife is cooking dinner. Mrs. Boggy is looking after the children, right? Just yeah, that sort of stuff, stereotypical sort of stuff. That then the husbands are in this role of someone who is not doing any of that. I believe that there are more instances of this in the game. I'm not sure if it's worth going through them right now. I don't think it kind of helps necessarily the point that I'm trying to make at this moment. So I'm just going to try and move past and see if that information is necessary later on. Then we can go look for it. But I feel that is happening in this game, that there is a sort of division between what the female characters do or are expected to do and what the male characters do or are expected to do in this game. So that takes us back to Grunty. Because clearly, if that is happening, if this sort of a division is happening between the male and the female, and I think this division really gets emphasized in Tooie, because in Tooie we suddenly have like Humba Wumba, who's like a like, you know, like a counterpart to Mumbo, right? It's like, because it's Tooie and it's a game that is about two. Whenever there can be a sort of a couple of male and female, the game includes it somehow. It includes two of everything. So, in any case, yeah, we have all of these sort of female and male characters, and they're all in different kind of roles and expectations. And obviously, all these roles and expectations are not unique to Banjo Kazooie, right? This is stuff that's happening in the world that we live in, right? We have these sorts of expectations of gender role behavior. And so it gets complicated, because obviously something can be seen from these gender roles that is expressed both symbolically and literally in this game. The literal expression is just this typical expression that there is an expectation for women to be sort of responsible for house labor, right? And for child rearing and house tasks of all kind, which then obviously keep them limited to that space. That is the space in which they can act, is the house. And then you have men as the role that is expected to leave the house, go out on great adventures, discover the world, earn a living, things like that, right? So that's like, let's say, the literal historical gender role issue that's happening in this game. But then the fact of so many women being locked up and lost in prisons, to me, well, it clearly resonates with this, because you are locked up. You're locked up in a material situation that you do not want to be in, right? Or, that you don't necessarily want to be in. If it's not a free choice, right? Let's say that if it is not something that you've freely chosen, but a situation that you have been, socially kind of brought into, then it's obviously, right, a prison. Like the game is expressing it symbolically in this way. You can't do what you would want to do. You have to do what is expected of you to do. Materially, again, I think the focus is somehow material, that maybe you would want to go to another material place. You would like to travel to a different place, but you can't, because you need to be home and you need to take care of the children, etc. Right? So, maybe you would want to dress in a different way, or actually, like, materially express yourself in a different way, and so on. But you can't. So, there seems to be then some, a clearly kind of like feminist theme going on in this game that somehow goes against the original reading that I was giving, which is that the original reading is interpreting Grunty as a villain, right? And that's a reading that you can take. You can be like, oh, Grunty is a villain, and she's like a greedy capitalist, and she wants more and more and more. She's not satisfied with what she wants. She wants to be different from who she is, wants to have more material power, more material freedom, and grow in material power and material freedom. And so one reading is to say, oh, such a villain, right? And she should be content with who she is and not constantly try to seek this sort of version of herself that she should be. and that's the thing, that when paired with all of the capitalist themes, this reading makes a lot of sense. Obviously, yeah, right? Because her search for herself seems to be causing all sorts of turmoil and trouble in the Banjo Kazooie world, sort of destroying the land, polluting the waters, just doing general villain stuff. It's like, oh, of course, all of this villain stuff is born from her desire to be someone else, so she shouldn't. But obviously, when read alongside all of the feminist themes in the game that seem to be saying, look, there is a division between the female and male gender roles. The female gender roles seem to be locked into limited material positions that don't allow them to, behave in the way that they would want to behave. So, a prison is already depicted as being something undesirable to any sentient being, right? A dark prison that you're locked in and don't want to be in. So the game, in its imagery, see, that's what's confusing. The game, in its very imagery, is on the one hand seems to be accusing Grunty of being a villain who should be stopped, and at the very same time, with the same imagery, the same symbolism in that game, is also defending the idea that if you are trapped in a prison of material limitation, as most female characters in the game are, you should escape. It should be a good thing to escape. And in fact, Banjo Kazooie spend most of their time helping people escape from prisons. That's almost all they do in this game. Not exactly, but there's a lot of that. So it's also saying, well, if Grunty were to be read as one of these female characters who are trapped in a gender role that limit them materially, then Grunty's search for further material power and material liberation is in fact a good thing, right? A desirable thing as presented by the game. So the game is simultaneously presenting the two things at the same time, that what Grunty is doing is good and that what Grunty is doing is bad. And somehow then it becomes the task of the player who is playing the game to pass that symbolism and read it in a way that makes sense to them. And I don't think this is limited to Banjo Kazooie. Like, I think that like, from my experience, this happens in almost any art, especially popular, let's say, big mainstream sort of art projects, such as video games, big video games, big movies, and things like that, seem to always have this sort of double-edged aspect to them, where they're simultaneously attacking and defending positions that seem to be opposed or in some sort of a dialogue between each other. And that's really interesting. So I think that Banjo Tooie is really interesting in this regard, because it's presenting something that seems to be very structured psychologically, but that is obviously working at both an unconscious and a conscious level. There seems to be aspects of what it's doing symbolically that are conscious to the game. The game seems to be aware of it, and there are things that the game seems to be doing. Well, again, it's hard to tell. Like, I'm not sure if I am one to judge that, but it's clear that the game is doing two things at once, to me. And that, I don't know. I think that's really interesting, and I think it's worth being explored and thinking about, because it relates deeply to ourselves, and it relates deeply to our very own sense of identity and of freedom in this world, and of what we want to do. Like, it's obviously it drinks from those sources, and it appeals to us as players. Otherwise, Banjo Kazooie wouldn't have become such a big game if it didn't appeal to us at some level, at some sort of archetypal level, right? There's something in this that resonates with us. So I think that it's good to explore it and see what it is that it says, because it's saying something important, it seems to me. So anyway, yeah, that's my spiel for today. I didn't have enough to say. So anyway, yeah, thanks, and yes, see you.